Thank God I don't cry that much
Yeah.
when I get on the
Keep
roll.
running.
Like this morning, I just
Last
don't
night.
stop, you know.
They're so hard to get started. Once you get them started, you want
Yeah.
to keep them coming.
Yeah.
I learned
It happened like Christmas. That was the last time I can remember, really.
I can think about it, talk about it because then a lot of time. Maybe I have.
Yeah. I just hate it when it comes up.
This is kind of a tough one today. We're going to talk about unresolved anger. And there's a lot of sparks that start to fly. We get people back to look at all of the hurt and the rage and the injustice that they've been victimized by in the past. But of course, it's this hurt and this anger that becomes an enormous obstacle to sobriety, that creates the delusion and denial, and then if it's not dealt with, creates relapse later on. Yep, it's hard. People tend to cry. They get in touch with some difficult things. But you know what I found in 20 years of doing this work? Here's where the freedom comes. Here's where the happiness comes. Here's where the release from so much of that bondage that creates the want to drink in the first place happens. So it's hard, and the only thing greater than the pain of doing this is the reward that you feel from the breakthroughs into the freedom. This is an important one today. Hello, how you all doing today? Did you have a good night's sleep, I hope? Today we're going to do some of the hardest work probably that you're ever going to have to do here in treatment. The scariest, hardest, most painful topic perhaps that you're going to have to deal with here and once you get into real recovery, which happens when you get out of here and you get on the street. And what I'm talking about is dealing with unresolved anger. The reason we're here to get well, to stay well, the first step in getting well and staying well is getting sober and then staying sober, uninterrupted sobriety. And what gets in the way of that so often is unresolved anger that sits inside, it boils in there, it festers in there. We carry resentments around, creates all kinds of pain, and then all of a sudden we want to drink. We want to quiet that hurt, quiet that pain, and get out and get some way to get rid of this hurt. Now, there's a difference between intellectually understanding where some of the pain and some of the hurt comes from. There's a difference between that and emotional healing. Anger is always around hurt, and we don't like to face hurt. I don't want to have to go back and live through that stuff. I don't want to have to reach back with my heart and touch that again. God, it hurt so much back then. Why would I ever want to do it now? You know, thinking about this, I don't know if any of you, before you got in here, saw the old movie serial Kung Fu. And it was about this young man that was taken to this temple and he was put through years and years of practice. Part of his graduation ceremony, and I just kind of cringe every time I think about this, he came out and he had a big cauldron filled with red hot coals. I mean, you could just see the heat shimmer off the stuff. And cut into the side of this big pot or this cauldron was a dragon on one side and a tiger on the other side. And his graduation ceremony, he had to go up and he went like this and pulled his sleeves back, and he had to pick that cauldron up right over the cutout of the dragon and the tiger with his bare forearms, pick it up, carry it a certain distance, set the thing down, and of course he was branded with it. And he stumbled out of the temple and fell in the snow, and it kind of quieted down. And you know what I thought about every time I saw that? That's what it's like going back and dealing with our hurt and dealing with our anger. Every time he got close to that pot, you kind of think, geez, I'm glad that isn't me. I mean, God, the last thing in the world I'd want to do is this red hot thing, pick it up. But see, if we don't get back and touch that hurt and that pain with our hearts and feel it, and in a certain sense relive it and actually deal with it, then that hurt, even if it's 10 years old, 20 years old, it stays right down in here, pulling the strings, setting the buttons, dictating our life. So I'm not talking about anger. I'm talking about unresolved anger. I'm talking about dealing with that unresolved hurt and that pain in the past. such a critical element in achieving sobriety and then achieving ongoing sobriety. Now let me just share with you just for a minute some of the things that unresolved anger does. Just see if any of you can relate to this. You know, Jan, as we're talking about this, or Soroy or Dick, see if you can relate to this. What unresolved anger does is fixate us at the point of the pain. Just like in some old biology class where they had a straight pin and they stuck it through some frog or some butterfly, it can't leave. Now I don't know exactly in this particular group going through treatment, but for so many couple people going through treatment, they were incest victims. They were terribly abused as kids. They were emotionally hurt. And it hurt so bad, and to think 30 years later and I'm still there. But that's what unresolved anger does. It fixates us at the point of pain. That time never ends. Well, if chemicals medicate pain, and that same horrible abuse and that same horrible pain is still going on, of course, enough of that pain, we're back to the pain reliever. It fixates us at the point of pain. If we don't pick that up and learn to accept and learn to forgive, we can never leave. We're still back in that room where the beatings took place, where the incest took place, where we were put down and hollered at and screamed at. We haven't left. Another thing that unresolved anger does is it isolates. Unresolved anger and intimacy cannot coexist. To the degree we sit on top of this little bubbling lake of this hurt and frustration and anger and rage, we will never have ongoing loving relationships. It isolates us. Now, we start talking in group here in a little bit. How often has it happened we got in some relationships almost, wanting the love, wanting to connect, and at some point we kind of say, I don't know how, anger came out almost like lightning, and we acted out and we screamed at somebody, we hollered at somebody, you get nervous again. Why? See, we bury that stuff, and if you bury it alive, it isn't dead. It's still alive. It's bubbling in there, and that old anger starts to come to the surface, stretches out, and it hurts. It causes all kinds of pain. Another thing that unresolved anger does, we obsess about it. And when we obsess about the hurt and about the pain, then we can't think straight. It consumes us. We start making wonderful plans, by God, how we're going to get even. And instead of thinking about recovery and thinking about our daily reading and thinking about our conscious contact with God, we're sitting off in a corner, I think I'm like to get a funnel, put it down this sucker's throat and pour hot oil down there. And we're thinking about getting even. And you don't think straight. And if we don't think straight, again, it leads to relapse. That's why we do our whole talk on relapse in here. It keeps getting the pain going, and the pain leads to falling backwards. So that unresolved anger, it just stinks. Not that there might not be reasons to be angry, but to sit on it and to have it year after year, that frustration and that hurt and that discouragement and all of the faces that unresolved anger wears. And it's because we're hurting. Hurt people hurt people. And some of that hurt, again, is 40 years old. Now, when we talk about anger, I'd like you to think of a triangle. And a definition of this anger, or this anger that we're going to use is, and think about this, anger is the emotional response to perceived injustice. Anger is always a justice issue. Anytime we perceive we have been cheated, we haven't been treated fairly, we haven't been dealt honestly with, anytime we feel we didn't get what we need when we had a right to it, the response is anger. Whether you call that anger hurt, whether you call it frustration, whether it comes out in switched addictions, in obsessive eating, whatever it may be, it's anger. And that anger, again, is about, there's cheating going on here. I didn't get what I needed. Now, this triangle, And what we're going to talk about again when we get in group, the way that anger and this unresolved anger works is top of the triangle is injustice. So where is the situation, the ongoing habit that we feel isn't fair? Where does the injustice come from? And we'll talk about that in a minute. From the injustice, if we don't touch it with our heart as well as our head and do our spirituality around it, which again, that's why we have a lecture on spirituality and ask God to forgive that, again, we're stuck there forever. But where it goes from then is punishment. We always go from anger, if it's not resolved, to punish. And you know who we punish most? We punish us. You're going to hear 1,000 times here in treatment and when you get out, an alcoholic cannot stand too much success. The worst thing that can happen to an alcoholic is prosperity or success. Why? Because when things get too good, and if we're sitting on top of that unresolved anger, see, we got to punish. We don't deserve the good stuff. And how old is that? I mean, how long are we going to carry around the hurt and the injustice that may have happened 30 or 40 years ago? How many relationships are we going to really damage or wreck because of unresolved stuff in the past? And the tendency, again, is so great to say, oh, I understand that. I understand that I was never loved. But have you touched it with your heart? Have you done the deal with the pot? See, that's the only place that that emotional healing is going to come from. Now, the third corner, after we do the punishment, if it's not resolved, then we justify. And God, we can justify the most inappropriate behavior. Who wouldn't have hit her in the face? She called me a name. I had a right to run the sucker over with a car. He pissed me off, so I ran over him with the car. And we justify it. We have a right to do this, the craziest stuff in the world. Well, you know, we aren't in treatment because we're all so sane. And at the time we're doing that crazy stuff, it seems right. But again, that's why it's so nuts. Now, top of the triangle. So let's go around this triangle just for a minute. So we're going to relate and then we're going to do a little sharing on it. Where does the injustice come from? What is the injustice in your life? What does it really feel like? Not, I don't know, 3-4 months ago, guy sitting right here in Gordy's chair, coming through treatment. Big guy, in not only because he started drinking, violent son of a gun. And one of the reasons he got dumped into treatment, drunk driving, he rammed a bus. I said, you mean you got in a car wreck? He said, hell no, I rammed him. I said, well, what were you in? He said, I had a little car. And you rammed a bus? What the hell are you doing ramming a bus? He said, well, I was going down the road and this bus started to merge. I said, so what? He said, nobody pushes me around. That sucker started to come, I hit him. I said, why would you ram a bus? And started again talking about, it was part of this lecture. And boy, he was a big guy, I'll tell you. He got right in my face. He said, I'll tell you what, talk about anger and injustice. I grew up in New York in a tenement. And I remember that day just like that. He said, I was hiding under this table, watching my dad, drunk, smashing my mother's head against the wall. And he said, by God, I made a commitment right then that when I got big enough, nobody was ever going to push me around again. Here it is 40 years later, and he's ramming buses. And I asked him, I said, John, you think you're angry? He said, no. I said, hell, that was 40 years ago. I forgot about that. If you stuff it inside and you don't emotionally deal with that, it's still driving your life. Before him, there was a gal well, maybe she's in the same group, but she said, you know, every time I get really lonely and hurt, my nose hurts. I said, Jesus, Sue, how does it happen that your nose hurts? And she said, all I ever wanted as a kid, all I ever wanted was to be loved. And the one I really wanted to be loved by was my dad. And he was always drinking, always drunk, hardly ever home. And she said, so often, and I figured this out about my nose, that I would be at the window waiting for him to come home so hard my nose was pressed against that window. Waiting for him to come home and give me a hug. Waiting for him to come home and say, oh, Susie, geez, you're my little girl, princess, I really... Never happened. Never happened. 35 years later, her nose still hurts when she gets lonely. besides being an alcoholic, drinking, obviously going through treatment, I don't know how many abusive relationships she gets into. She wouldn't know what to do with the relationship with the man that treated her right, and the man, she couldn't do it. She's still back there with her nose against the window waiting for some man to treat her right, and it never happened. Where is the injustice in your life? Remember doing a fifth step with a lovely, neat gal, and she says, you know, when I get stressed out, my neck hurts. I said, well, how does that happen? She said, when I was a little kid, again, my dad was drunk, threw me down the stairs, and his mother came up, who was living with us, stood on my neck. Wouldn't let me get up. Made me lay there until I apologized for making him angry. And here it is, 30 years later. And when she gets in a bind, when she gets stressed out, she's still there. Neck still hurts. I said, how are you with your dad? She said, well, he's dead. He's out of the picture. Hell, he ain't out of the picture. He's still throwing her down the steps every day. That's what that unresolved anger does. The injustice then translates into punishment. How do you punish yourself? How do you punish other people? When things start to get too good, you know, when you start feeling happy, or when you start getting stressful, what do you do? Do you punish yourself? Do you find some way to go out and get fired? Some way to wreck a relationship? Some way to damage your health? Go out and eat something that you're going to get sick? See, we punish. Or we punish other people. Get snotty. Get cynical. Find fault. Find some way to get even. But see, why? And part of that again is, it's that injustice. Where is the injustice in your life? Have you touched it with your heart as well as you had with your head? And then that third corner again is that justification. Do we justify it? We find some way to say, well, that ain't me. That isn't me, it's them. Or we find some way to say, well, I don't think I'm angry. I mean, I have a responsible job. Yeah, I wound up in treatment, but that was more bad luck than anything else. But we start to justify it. See, and that system is going on all the time. The injustice to the punishment to the justification reinforces the anger, and that vicious cycle just keeps going on and on and on. Now, the first step in dealing with that, one of the very first steps in releasing some of that hurt and that anger and that rage is to identify that it's there. It's to touch it with our heart as well as with our head. And again, what we're going to do a lot when we get into group in just a minute is start sharing it. Is there anger in your life? Is there a lot of buried stuff? Buried hurt, buried injustice that maybe you think isn't there anymore because I don't live home. They sold the farm. It ain't there. Everybody's dead. But you're still carrying it around. See, and again, that first step is if we can understand that it's there, if we can own that it's there, if we can get in touch with it. And again, it's scary stuff, and that's why we need the support of this group and get back and get our arms around it. That's the first step then in getting rid of it. But what is so important again, if we want not only sobriety, but ongoing sobriety, quality sobriety, you can't do that with a boatload of anger sitting inside. You just can't do it. Now, in preparation for group, getting ready to get into group and really do some real sharing on this. Let me just ask, Walt. Let me start asking you. Can you recall, or are you in touch with hurt, discouragement? Was there ever a time growing up, Walt, when you really didn't get what you needed, that hurt, and that hurt eventually leads to drinking?
All my life I can remember it's never been all right for me to be me. It's never been all right for me to be angry or to tell people I was angry. When I was a little kid, I can remember in our family, it was okay for my older sister to be angry. She could get away with it, but it wasn't okay for me.
What happened when you did? What happened when you got angry? How were you treated?
Nobody liked me.
What did they say?
You should be ashamed of yourself. You know, why don't you go to your room?
And how did that feel, Walt? How did it feel when you had a legitimate complaint, you had something that was real, and you tried to say that to somebody, and they said, you ought to be ashamed of yourself, Walt, get out of here, go upstairs. How'd that feel?
I felt just terrible. I felt isolated, alone, like nobody cared.
And what did you wind
And
up
I also
doing?
felt dumb, you know, like I wasn't as
Dumb.
smart as everybody else. Everybody else was right, and I was always a retard or something. Or,
And then what did that translate into? Then how did you act? What'd you do with that?
I'd usually go away. I mean, I'd go
Isolate?
hide, be alone. I'd stay alone.
Yeah. How old were you when you started drinking, Walt?
Well, I think when I first started drinking, I was probably 14, and that was more of a peer type of thing. Even in the family, you know, it was okay with my father if I drank at that time, but I never. It wasn't excessive at that time. It was just occasionally.
Sure. When do you think you got in to drinking as a way to not feel dumb, to not feel isolated, to not feel kicked in the teeth that your feelings didn't count? When did those two start to link up?
Probably when I was about 25, you know, 20 years ago or so.
But you make the connection between the drinking and the pain.
Oh yeah, especially the last 10 years. When I went to see a doctor before I came here, one of my main complaints was I was angry all the time, 24 hours a day, 23 and a half. I was just goddamn angry. When I couldn't figure out anything to be angry about. And if somebody asked me, "How are you?" I'm fine.
I'm fine, sure, the delusion, anything else.
But I can remember, and I just thought of it while you were talking, probably third or fourth grade, being sent to the coat room. You know, the time I was in grade school, there was a separate room, long room with hooks, and I can remember being sent there, and I felt it was so unfair that I was there at that time. But I can remember writing. I had a piece of paper and a pencil with me. I was just writing cuss words about that teacher, and I wrote them down and spent my whole time in there. But then it wouldn't have been okay for anybody to find out that I was that angry, that I wrote those bad words, so I had to hide that.
So not only were you angry, you weren't allowed to be angry, so then you had to hide that.
And it's just been recently that I'm able to admit that I'm angry.
Yeah, look at the pressure in that. Look at the pressure in that. Enough pressure, back to drinking. Soraya, what are you feeling? What's going on with you?
It's just, you just hit a lot of chords, a lot of nerves, and I feel like I've got a lot of pent up anger and a lot of hurt.
At who, Soraya? Who are you mad at?
At my mother and my father.
Why? What didn't they give you?
Well, my father wasn't there,
Wasn't
and
there.
he didn't want the girls around because he wanted male children.
So
And
you
my
were
mo-
wrong because of the sex you were born.
Yeah, yeah. And my mother just, well, she was an alcoholic too, but she was extremely critical, and just the only time you ever heard anything was when something was bad, you know.
Did you ever
know.
feel like you got the acceptance and the love that you needed?
No.
No. And how'd that feel? How'd that feel not getting that? Girl growing up who wanted to be the apple of her daddy's eye, and he ain't even there. Not only is it put down, he's not even there. Wanting them to come to your dance recitals, come to your graduations. How did that feel? How did it feel?
It hurt.
That
a
hurts.
lot.
That hurts. Do you feel like you've dealt with that emotionally, Soraya, rather than, in addition to intellectually understanding that?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. See, now, do you see a connection? Do you feel a connection between your chemical use, because again, chemicals medicate pain, and all of that hurt and that abandonment and that fear and that rage, that there's a connection between the use and the anger?
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. See, and what we're going to really deal with and give you the support, talk about what that felt like. What do you want to say to your dad? If your dad was standing right here, I'm your dad, what do you want to say to him? To say it and then get rid of it, you know, so you can be free. What do you want to tell him?
Just that I'm a good person and that I want him to love me.
You want ask him. I'm your dad. Ask me. Ask me if. What do you want to ask me, Soraya? What do you want to say to me? Go ahead. It's safe here. What do you want to tell me?
I love you, Dad.
Great. 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 And you're a good person. Whether I was able to give it to you then or not, you're a lovable, good person regardless of that. See, that's one thing to know it in your head, to get back there and touch it with your feelings, to say those things that maybe you've been stuffing in there all those years. Janet, what's going on with you?
When I was 13, you know, these kids used to come to me and say, I'm related to you. And I went to my mom and I asked her and she said, don't pay him any mind. And she was living with someone at the time and I thought this man was my father. And I went to a parade downtown and this man came up to me and he said, Janet. And I looked at my brother and I said, who is this? My married brother said, ask him. And when I asked him, who was it? He said, I'm your father. And for 13 years, I thought this one man was my dad, and he wasn't.
Didn't know that.
And as much as I love my mother, I'm angry for what she did to me.
Yeah.
And then,
How long ago was that you found that out, Janet?
when I was 13.
13.
And it hurts, and it still hurts.
Mm-hmm. Have you talked to your mom about that?
My mom, when I went to her, she just said that it was the truth, and she took me down and talked to my stepfather, and I withdrew.
Yeah.
And then when you talked about how we take things out on ourselves or destroy
Punish
ourselves,
yourself.
I went into chemicals and I became
Yeah.
bulimic, and it's like I hated myself.
Yeah.
I tried to hurt myself in every way that I could.
Yeah. Yeah. Janet, I want you to look at me and see yourself. Okay? I'm you. Tell me, who is you, a truth about yourself. Tell me that even though you were 13 before you knew who your dad was, that you're still a wonderful, beautiful human being who deserves happiness, who doesn't have to punish herself through bulimia, through chemicals. Tell me that. Look at me and tell me that. Say, I'm a good person, regardless of what happened when I was 13.
I'm a good person.
You deserve to be loved. You deserve love to happen to you. People care about you. See, and we can get rid of that hurt. We can get rid of that anger. And that's what going back and getting a hold of that real stuff, touching it with our heart and not just our head. It's the only way emotional freedom is going to happen to us. Now, as we get into group and start sharing with this, here's some, I think, important, real questions about anger. Why is anger an important issue in recovery? Why is it so important to understand anger, and again, unresolved anger, especially that old stuff? Janet 13, Soraya 14, Walt when he was way back as a kid, not allowed to be who he was, not allowed to feel. What is the relationship between that to getting sober? What is the delusion and denial we put around that hurt and not face it? And again, it stays in there and eats us alive from the inside. How does anger express itself in you? Janet just said part of the way anger expresses itself for her is chemical use and bulimia. Well, all kinds of different ways. When you really feel that anger, do you punish yourself? Do you punish other people? like the guy that was in here a couple months ago taking his little car, running into buses? You know, how does your anger express itself? Depression, how does that work? Who are you angry at? No small question. It's so easy to say that we're angry at somebody else. I'm angry at my mother. I'm angry at my father. But are you also angry at yourself? Have you taken some of that shame and some of that guilt and turned it inside and got really mad at yourself? And then that punish and then justify, which deepens the anger? Who are you mad at? What's the injustice causing the anger in your life? How old is it? How old is it? See, and maybe it started 40 years ago, but maybe the situations causing the anger, we're perpetuating it day in and day out. Some of it may be 40 years old, and some of it may be yesterday. And I'm still creating the situations that causing that anger. What's the first step in getting in touch with and dealing with that anger? And again, we can't deal with anything that we don't identify. We can't deal with anything that we don't own. And again, that's why this group support is so important. I think about that kung fu thing and that boiling pot, and who in the world wants to get a hold of it? But if we don't, it owns us. It owns us. It will dictate the quality of happiness in our life forever. Hurt people hurt people. And we need to stop hurting others, and we need to stop hurting ourselves. And dealing with that anger is a critical way of doing that. Hard stuff. All right. Would you all stand up? Let's all stand up. I mean, there's been some heavy, hurting, hard kind of stuff. Turn around. Let's look at each other, and let's tell each other it's safe to be here. Let's put your arms around each other. This is scary, hard stuff, and I want to thank you for your sharing so far, and letting go of some of this pain. We need others in our life that's safe to share it with, and it's an enormous trust that everybody gives us when we share this kind of deep-seated hurt and this stuff. But that's the only way we get free of it. Okay, let's go next door and get in group, and let's let go of some demons here.